Good afternoon and welcome back to the Public Service Commission here in docket 24-34-E. Handled some preliminary matters this morning, and it's my understanding this afternoon, Mr. Burgess, that you have a panel for us as to the settlement agreement, and that from there we will keep people if we need them. Is that right?
Absolutely, that is correct. And before we get to that settlement panel, Commissioner Belzer had asked about the readability of certain exhibits, and my eyes hurt too when I went and took a look at that. So we've got those. We're going to pass them around, and hopefully that'll be an improvement from what we had.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess.
That's great.
You're very welcome. And Mr. Chairman, if you're ready, we're ready to call our settlement panel.
We're ready.
Okay, Dominion Energy South Carolina calls Keller Kassam and Kevin Kokums to the witness stand.
All right, raise your right hand, please. Do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Okay, I'm going to start with you, Mr. Kassam. Would you please state your full name for the record?
Keller Kassam,
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
Dominion Energy South Carolina, President.
And Mr. Kassam, did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direct supervision and pre-filed in this docket 13 pages of settlement testimony?
Yes, sir.
And are there any changes or corrections required of your settlement testimony?
Yes, sir, there is.
Okay, would you please direct the commission to the page number and the line number that requires correction?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman and fellow commissioners, if you would go to my settlement testimony and go to page 2, line 9, we would like to substitute Frank Knapp Jr. in place of South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce. That is the first change.
Are there any other corrections required of your your settlement testimony, Mr. Kassam?
No, sir.
If I ask you all the questions contained in your settlement testimony subject to that correction, would your answers be the same?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, we would move into the record the pre-filed settlement testimony of Keller Kassam as corrected from the stand.
I'm sorry. The pre-filed corrected testimony of Keller Kassam will be placed in evidence as if the questions were asked from the stand. I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
13 pages or?
Yes, sir, that's correct, 13 pages. Mr. Kassam, do you have any exhibits attached to your settlement testimony?
Yes, sir, I have a settlement agreement.
And do you have any changes or corrections that are necessary for the settlement agreement?
Yes, sir, I do.
And would you please direct the commission to the page number where that correction is required?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman and fellow commissioners, if you go to page 3 of that settlement agreement, and if you would go all the way down to where it says DESC witnesses, subportion number 2, where it says M. Sean Randall, direct, I would like to go in and strike and rebuttal and insert correct before direct. And insert direct right there in the parenthetical place, Mr. Burgess.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Kassam. And just for clarity's sake, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Randall did not file rebuttal testimony. He's only filed corrected direct testimony, so we just wanted to make sure that was clear. Okay, Mr. Kassam, any other changes required of the settlement agreement?
No, sir.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, we would move into the evidence as the next hearing exhibit, WKK-3, which is attached to Mr. Kassam's testimony, and be asked that that be marked as the next hearing exhibit in this docket as corrected by Mr. Kassam from the stand.
The settlement agreement with corrections will be the next exhibit, marked ID number. It is Exhibit 10, received into evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kassam, have you prepared a summary of your settlement testimony?
Yes, sir, I have.
Would you please deliver that at this time?
Good afternoon, Chairman Powers and members of the Commission. I am here on behalf of Dominion Energy South Carolina to testify in support of the settlement and to explain why it represents a great outcome for all parties, and most importantly, why it also represents a great outcome for the safety and reliability of Dominion Energy South Carolina's electric system. The company is grateful to all of the parties for the cooperation, patience, and compromise that they brought to these negotiations. We specifically thank the leadership, lawyers, experts, and support staff of each of these organizations, and we thank the Office of Regulatory staff for leading in this process. Reaching consensus on a settlement of this magnitude was a remarkable achievement. It confirms that parties with varied interests can still achieve agreement on matters that are important to utility regulation in this state. Settlement discussions began shortly after interveners filed their direct testimony. The company reviewed the direct testimony of each of the 20 witnesses for the Office of Regulatory staff and the interveners and captured each recommendation or position asserted by them. Our regulatory and finance teams and leadership then considered the impact of each item on the company, its financial position, and its rate structure. Then, after appropriate internal deliberation, the company prepared a detailed term sheet that responded to each of the points identified. In the end, the term sheet covered 62 individual items, some with numerous sub-items. We submitted the initial term sheet to all parties and their lawyers on June 13th, 2024, which was 5 business days after the Office of Regulatory staff and interveners filed testimony. In response, ORS coordinated discussions of our term sheet with the interveners and their counsel and prepared counteroffers. In all, we collectively prepared and exchanged 10 comprehensive offers and counteroffers over 6 days before reaching agreement, all against a backdrop of numerous meetings and phone conversations. This was truly a Herculean effort, and the parties worked over the Juneteenth and the July 4th holidays to accomplish it. The Office of Regulatory staff is to be commended for its work in coordinating the negotiations. Our hope and plan had been to complete the negotiations and present a signed settlement agreement to the Commission by July the 8th of 2024, which was 1 week before the scheduled hearing date. That was a commitment that ORS required of us at the outset of the process so that the parties could provide the Commission with a settlement agreement in advance of this hearing. Despite our best good faith efforts, negotiations were not concluded until July the 9th, and sign-off on the final terms of the term sheet did not occur until July the 10th of 2024. Converting the term sheet into a fully formed settlement and stipulation and obtaining signatures on that document by the many parties has required an additional 2 days. I can assure you, all parties, in good faith, tried to accelerate the process to give the Commission as much time as possible to review the settlement. Ultimately, this settlement confirms that parties with varied interests can still achieve agreement on matters that are important to utility regulation in this state. If the settlement is approved, the parties will agree to an overall annual revenue increase of $219.47 million. This is a 28% reduction from the company's original rate request, net of demand-side management adjustments. Compared to rates at the time of the original request in March, and offset by the fuel cost reduction and other factors approved earlier this year, the settlement's rate request would represent a net 1% increase for a typical residential customer's electric rates. If the settlement is approved, Dominion Energy South Carolina will accept rates giving it the opportunity to earn a return on equity of 9.94% and its actual capital structure of 47.49% debt and 52.51% equity. With certain exceptions, the settlement rates were calculated based on the revenue and expense adjustments proposed by the Office of Regulatory Staff. The new rates would go into effect for services rendered on and after September 1, 2024. To mitigate the rate increase to customers, Dominion Energy South Carolina will provide a one-time $7.5 million bill credit, funded entirely by shareholders, to residential and small general service rate class customers. Additionally, the company agrees to use a total of $3 million in shareholder funds to increase the 5-year estimated budget of $14.5 million for the company's Neighborhood Energy Efficiency Program, known as NEEP, beginning in 2025. In response to comments from the night hearings, these shareholder funds shall be used primarily to address low-income customers' needs and may be used to address health and safety issues that would otherwise preclude program participation. The company has agreed to these rates with the understanding that the adjustments are part of a single integrated settlement package and will not set precedents for future proceedings. Accepting the settlement on this basis allows the proceeding to be resolved based on pragmatic considerations in a way that might not have been possible otherwise. An absolutely critical component of the settlement, from the company's perspective, is the amount of revenue to be produced by the rates that will be authorized under this settlement. As company witness Phibbs can confirm, this amount of revenue is critical to maintaining the credit metrics that support the company's bond ratings and access to capital as we seek to finance the approximately $900 million per year new investment that the company plans to make to meet the energy needs of South Carolina. We accepted the level of revenue adjustment contained in the settlement as an amount of additional revenue that would support the cash flow and earnings needed to support a strong credit profile for Dominion Energy South Carolina and give investors confidence that DESC has the opportunity to earn a reasonable return, given the regulatory lag that will result as DESC continues to invest capital in our state's energy infrastructure. It was also critically important to DESC that revenue requirements would be established based on the company's actual capital structure. If a hypothetical capital structure were used and the return on equity is not increased as well, the new rates will not produce the level of revenues that is required. Dominion Energy South Carolina could not have accepted the return on equity or other terms of this settlement if imposed under a different capital structure. Recognizing the importance of this settlement as a package, DESC agreed to certain items that the company does not accept on the merits, as outlined in its rebuttal testimony. Specifically, DESC agreed to remove from rate base 50% of materials and supplies that were over 2 years and 9 months old. This will result in a $50.2 million charge against earnings in 2024. This is a heavy hit that will be borne by shareholders, but was a price the company was willing to pay to achieve settlement, which the company fully supports. Similarly, in the interest of settlement, the company agreed to defer without carrying costs the $5 million unrecovered capital cost of retired peaking plants. Dominion Energy South Carolina has not changed its position as set forth in its rebuttal testimony concerning this issue. The amount of carrying costs on this amount of investment is minimal, and DESC could accept the loss of that revenue in the interest of settlement. However, while the company fully supports the settlement, much larger plant retirements are likely in the future. And if similar issues are not raised about them, the company will argue that denying a return on the unrecovered balance of capital costs related to those plants is contrary to just and reasonable rate making. In the interest of settlement, the company accepted a deduction of $228.8 million from rate base based on an analysis of working cash capital that the company has disputed. Company witness Kokums and Taylor can answer questions about why this is the case. The company will continue to advocate for its position in future proceedings, but fully supports the settlement agreement in this proceeding. In support of the comprehensive settlement, Dominion Energy South Carolina has agreed not to recover $2 million in rate case expenses from year 2020 that were not booked until after ORS conducted its audit of those expenses when preparing its testimony in that case. DESC has not changed its position on this issue as set forth in its rebuttal testimony. However, in the interest of settlement, which the company fully supports, the company agreed to accept the loss of recovery of this amount, which will result in a $2 million charge against 2024 earnings, which will fall on shareholders. This issue may arise in the future cases, and due to the non-precedental nature of this settlement, DESC has reserved its right to contest any future write-offs. Next, the company continues to support a 45-day coal supply as important to support reliability until such time as our coal units have been replaced. The company is rebuilding its coal supply in light of the disruptions due to COVID, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, staffing issues at railroads, and operational issues at coal mines. The company fully expects to achieve a 45-day coal supply this year and will continue to work towards achieving it as an annual average, which means stocking up on coal during the shoulder months to offset high usage during the winter and summer. In the settlement, we agreed that the company will begin making quarterly filings with the Commission concerning its coal supply, and if the system supply of coal falls below the 45-day threshold during the rolling 12-month period, a party may request that the Commission make a pro forma adjustment to DESC's fuel expenses in the subsequent annual fuel proceeding, unless it is shown that the reason for falling below the 45-day threshold was beyond the company's control. We believe that this provides an appropriate mechanism for the Office of Regulatory Staff and the parties to protect customers' interests as Dominion Energy South Carolina rebuilds its coal supplies without jeopardizing the necessary reliability function which our coal units serve today. As their direct testimony shows, the solar and environmental interests were concerned that our residential time of use rates as proposed had a peak period from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. during the summer, which is a period when there is little solar generation. We chose that period because when solar is online, the company has a reduced need to serve customers' needs with additional higher-cost dispatchable fossil generation. In the interest of settlement, we agreed to shift the on-peak period forward by 2 hours to 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. This gives residential solar customers some opportunity to offset peak time of use rates. In the interest of settlement, Dominion Energy South Carolina offered to reduce the amount of storm damage collections for the reserve for future storm costs to $1.5 million, as opposed to the higher amounts proposed in company and certain intervener testimony. In the context of the overall settlement, limiting revenue earmarked for the storm damage reserve account supported Dominion Energy South Carolina's ability to accept an overall revenue adjustment limited to $219.47 million, but still provides a meaningful contribution to the storm damage reserve. In regards to incentive compensation, the settlement reduces incentive compensation by $3.8 million to remove amounts that the Office of Regulatory Staff and the interveners believed to be unjustified. In the settlement, the parties have adopted allocation percentages for the cost of service in this proceeding of 58.4% for residential, 11.0%, 6% for small general service, 7.48% for medium general service, 17.39% for large general service, and 5.67% for lighting. This allocation falls within the range of allocation proposals made by the interveners who represent customers in each of the major customer groups. The results represent a compromise that the interveners proposed and were willing to accept. The settlement was negotiated as a package and includes multiple trade-offs and interrelated provisions that together create a balanced resolution of this case. None of the settlement terms operate independently of the others. By the terms of the settlement itself, any changes would allow the parties to withdraw their consent. Let me conclude by saying that the settlement is an important step during a transformative time for the electric industry in South Carolina. The parties to this settlement are stakeholders who will need to work together in the coming years as we plan for the tremendous growth and economic development in our state, coal plant retirements, the integration of additional renewable capacity and storage on our system, and expanding energy efficiency programs. The settlement shows that with the proper leadership, these parties, as well as the office of the governor and committees of the General Assembly, can collaborate on important issues for the electric system. Our goal is to provide reliability, security, and peace of mind to our customers who depend upon us each and every second of their day. Where we can create consensus on complex regulatory issues as we've done here, our ability to consistently achieve that goal becomes more assured. For the purpose of the settlement, Dominion Energy South Carolina is conceding certain issues that it would not normally accept. However, achieving a consensus like this requires honest give and take on all sides. Under the Office of Regulatory Staff's leadership, we've been able to do that. I respectfully request the Commission approve the settlement as presented, which is before you, without objection. This concludes the summary of my settlement testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Kassam. Mr. Kokums, I'll now turn to you. Would you please state your full name for the record
Yes, my name is Kevin Kokums.
and by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Dominion Energy Services as a manager of regulation.
And Mr. Kokums, did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direct supervision and pre-filed in this docket 2 pages of settlement testimony?
Yes, I have.
And are there any changes or corrections required of your settlement testimony?
No, they're not.
If I ask you all the questions contained in your settlement testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Chairman, we would move into the record the pre-filed settlement testimony of Mr. Kevin Kokums as if given orally from the stand.
The pre-filed 2-page testimony of Kevin Kokums will be placed in the record as if it were taken from the stand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Kokums, have you prepared a summary of your settlement testimony?
I have.
Would you please deliver that at this time?
Good afternoon, Chairman Powers and members of the Commission. My testimony concerns the exhibits to the settlement agreement, which provide the calculations that convert the individual adjustments to which the parties have agreed into the revenue adjustment shown in paragraph 7 of the settlement agreement, as well as the overall revenue requirement for the company on which rates will be set, the allowable rate base for the company after the adjustments to rate base contained in the settlement agreement have been made, and other calculations necessary to accurately present the results of the settlement. Translating the individual adjustments contained in the settlement into their revenue requirement involves well understood but complex calculations of their impact to certain expense accounts, impacts to rate base, and the resulting tax implications. I have reviewed the calculations contained in the exhibits to the settlement agreement and find them to be accurate. Other witnesses appearing later in the case may have more detailed information about individual adjustments, but I can answer to the best of my ability any commissioner questions about the calculations shown on the exhibits and their underlying adjustments. This concludes the summary of my settlement testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Kokums. Mr. Chairman, under the settlement agreement, the signatories to the settlement agreement have waived their right to cross-examination of any witnesses. And likewise, the non-signatories, counsel has informed me that they do not have cross-examination for these witnesses. So to that extent, I'll tender the witness panel to the commission for examination.
All right. So non-signatory as well have agreed not to cross-examine.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner questions. Commissioner Belser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, gentlemen. First of all, Mr. Kassam, I'd like to thank you for that detailed explanation of the settlement discussions. I don't think we've ever had quite that level of detail, and I think that provides some very important context. So I'd like to thank you for that detail.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
I don't really have some particular order for some of my questions, and if you're not the right person and want to punt this to somebody later on, just let me know.
Yes, ma'am.
But Mr. Kokums, I may have one for you, but we'll see. Mr. Kassam, what would you say is the major is there one major driver of this rate case? One area?
The major driver would be the $1.6 billion that we've invested in the system for reliability. That includes any environmental upgrades that we've had to our generation units that are typically required by law. They include some freeze protection to some of our generation units that is just good, sound investment from a reliability standpoint that our customers come to expect. They have to do with hardening our transmission assets. You see a lot of wood going away, replaced by steel, so it can withstand, say, 150 mile per hour winds as opposed to maybe a 75 mile per hour wind. And also on our distribution system, where we have employed a number of systems, everything from SCADA switches in the field to looping some of our poorest performing circuits, to putting IntelliTeam devices out that can actually detect fault current and switch the system around without human interaction. And then, of course, always vegetation management. CenterPoint Energy is going through a tough time right now in Houston, and we've sent crews out there to assist, both overhead line crews as well as vegetation management crews. And one of the things Governor Abbott came out this morning, you know, when you get a storm and everybody's sitting in the heat, they're all worried, and they're saying now that they didn't trim their right-of-way and trees as they should. So I can't really point to one thing. I can point to a lot of things, and the one thing that I can point to is the safe and reliable operation of our system, so that when our customers flip the light, power comes on. The power's there, the light comes on. Also, economic development across our state. South Carolina recently was ranked as 19th in the nation for economic development, a fertile ground for economic development, and then all the population growth we have. Bluffton, 10%. The march coming from the coast, coming up I-26. It's tremendous. The more you sit in traffic, that's the more houses that are going on. So all those things together and all of that growth define the investments we have to make on a daily basis to serve our existing customers and to connect our new customers.
Okay, thank you for that. And when you pointed to the $1.6 billion in investment, that is investment that the company has made that is not currently in rates. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And so the purpose of this case is recovery of costs that the company has had to spend. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I know one of the issues that is in the settlement agreement had to do with maintaining an appropriate inventory level of materials and supplies. Is there an industry standard that indicates what an appropriate level of those materials is?
Well, there are FERC accounting rules that govern them. There are general accounting, accepted accounting principles that govern them. And then we have internal protocols where we go in and perform audits on every other year to look at inventory and to get rid of any obsolete material that we may not be using.
Okay. And you just went to my next question. You said every other year. The company conducts an audit every other year of that?
That is correct. Yes, ma'am.
One of the, I've got a couple of points, but in the settlement agreement, I think it was paragraph 60, and in your settlement testimony on page 4, you spoke of a bill credit. Let's see, it's page 4 at the bottom of the page, a one-time $7.5 million bill credit funded by shareholders. Can you explain, how's that going to work? Is that going to be I believe it's going to be allocated based on the allocation factors in the settlement agreement for how any revenue increase would be dispersed.
That is correct.
Or applied.
That is correct. I mean, one of the things that came out of the night hearings, and I appreciate all of y'all taking your time, because some of you, particularly from the upstate, y'all had to drive a long way to get to those night hearings, and they were very important to sit there. And as Mr. Burgess said before each one of them, we were there to listen to those customers that were there. And based upon that, and also based upon the consumer advocate being a part and being an important intervener in this case, those combination of factors went together as far as devising that bill credit and the amount of what it was and how it will be allocated to those customers.
Okay. Can you tell me, is that going to be the same amount for every customer? Is it based on usage? How is that going to appear?
It's going to be based upon the same amount for each customer.
Okay. So it's a flat rate.
That is correct. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. On page 6 of your settlement testimony, you indicated that, I'm down in lines 17 and 18, and I don't mean to take this out of context, and you can place it in context as you see fit, but you said it's important that the level of revenue requirement under the settlement agreement would give investors confidence that Dominion has the opportunity to earn a reasonable return. Why is that important?
Well, I think it came up in the night hearing, and it comes up in the legislature a lot with various committees. People always say, well, they're guaranteed a return. I think in the night hearings, you even gave a point of clarification at one of the night hearings where people say that we're guaranteed a return of 9.5, and that's certainly not the case. We're guaranteed the opportunity to earn that return. And in South Carolina, unlike a lot of states, we're kind of a donut in the hole when you look at it from a regulatory perspective, in that we have a good bit of regulatory lag. And I'm becoming more educated on that based upon now that we're owned by an out-of-state utility, Dominion Energy Virginia. They have a number of riders and other mechanisms where they have more immediate recovery of their investments that they have, and they have special programs associated with that. Here, by the time that rates become effective, we already have invested millions and millions of more dollars, as I discussed earlier, and that regulatory lag, we're never going to be able to earn that return on equity. And so that is something that we get handicapped in the investment community for here in South Carolina. And so all we're trying to focus on is the fact that we need to have a strong return on equity. We are pleased that the parties agreed to our actual cap structure as it relates to this, because the credit metrics are important. We're not a bank. We have to borrow money for what we do when we make large investments. And if we don't have good credit metrics as a result of regulatory activity or our ability to earn, I think the last time we presented a quarterly earnings, we were down around 4%. I can't quote the exact decimals, but around 4%. That's not a guaranteed return. And so that regulatory lag over time, giving the investments, is something that really handicaps South Carolina compared to other states within the Southeast. And it is something that we are constantly having to assure external investors, equity investors, that, hey, we do have strong growth. We're in a good service territory. We're growing. But all of that has to go into balance. And so that's what that testimony means. It's just balancing it out so that this is looked at a favorable area for regulatory outcomes to continue our trajectory with economic development as well as growth, and to be able to fund those investments at the least cost.
And when you talk about funding those investments at least cost, where's that funding coming from?
It's coming from external investors that put forward equity and expect a return. And it's also coming from debt, where we have debt holders that actually focus even more on our credit rating to ensure that we're a healthy company and that we're going to be able to be capable of giving them a return on the investments that they make with us.
Okay.
And Mr. Phibbs, he's the expert on that much more than I am. So I deal on the tool shed ops side. He's the financial guy, and he'll be coming up later, and he can address that in more detail, Commissioner Belzer.
Okay. I believe in the last rate case, the company was ordered to conduct a lead lag study for cash working capital. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And the company did that. Is that correct? Mr. Cocombs, I see you nodding your head.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And the company came up with an amount pursuant to that study, and interveners took exception with some of the parameters of the study and with the result. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
They took issue. They had a different opinion on what the results should be. The lead leg study itself, there were various opinions on that study, but we were pretty close with the additional adjustments or the additional decreases to rate base is what the interveners actually added in and we took issue with.
And can you explain to me briefly the settlement position with regard to the, what was it, 228 million deduction?
That's exactly correct. It was $228 million reduction to rate base that, again, for the purposes of the greater good of the settlement, the company has agreed to accept that position, knowing that we aren't setting a precedent going forward.
Okay. I just want to briefly touch on the coal supply, if we could. Currently, there is not a 45-day supply. Is that correct? Of coal.
Yes, Commissioner Belzer, that's correct. 45-day coal supply would be 681,000 tons of coal on the ground. We currently have 480. I know everybody knows just how hot it's been outside here this summer. And those coal units, man, they've run. And thank the Lord they've run. And thank the Lord they're running today. I just got an update saying our peak's going to be another 200 megawatts. And thank goodness they're there to run. So every train that comes in is about 12,500 tons. So on those shoulder days, we try to make that up. The unfortunate thing this year, we fall into an every 18 months, VC Summer Station gets a refueling outage. So they're going into a refueling outage this fall. Well, with that 660 megawatts, which is our share that comes to us, we're going to have a harder time climbing that hill and getting that 45-day inventory there. But I think it's important. I went through COVID, and I was on the phone every week with the railroads. What trains you got coming? Which ones you got crewed? Where are they? I was like one of these train aficionados that likes to go out and look at the trains. I was trying to find out where they are and when they would get to our various plants at Cope and Williams and Wateree. So I do believe that if we, I've taken a number of people out to our coal plants. I take them to a gas plant and say, hey, gas comes out of this header right here. Something happens to this pipe. That could impact our fuel inventory. Nuclear plant, you got uranium. We got hydro and Fairfield pump storage. We're in the middle of a drought. That puts a challenge on us as well. But I can go out and point to that big rock pile out there. It looks like rocks. I can go and point to it and say, that's at least a month's worth of supply out there. So, no, man, we don't have 45-day. But for all of those reasons, that's why I believe that it is prudent for us to try to achieve that. Can we get it done? Man, it's going to be a heavy lift. But you know what? I think that's the right thing to do going forward based upon what we've been through over the last 4 years as far as where we are today.
Well, and that's kind of where I was going with this, is over the last 4 years, there are some constraints with getting coal in a timely manner, is there not?
Well, there was. That was terrible. It's just like anything else. It's kind of hard to hire people.
Is it better now?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Okay.
It is. In fact, they had a hard time, number one, hiring people, but then when you bring somebody on with the trains, I found this out with the railroads. They're going to be trained and certified just like a lineman that we have on our electric system. And I mean, they got to know how to switch and do things like that and do it safely and reliably. And so it has improved. I mean, we still have those calls. Instead of weekly, they're kind of monthly now. But the Michael Shin, who's testified before this commission, he doesn't report up through my organization, but he's in every one of my weekly staff meetings. And the reason being is I want to make sure we've got security of that supply coming in. If there are any hiccups and we need to get on the phone and go to Plan B, we can do that.
And when you're talking about the shoulder months, you're talking about what, September, October, March?
I'm talking about the spring and the fall. Yes, ma'am.
All right. I think there was one other question I had for you, but I don't see it right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Kokums.
Thank you.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Belzer. Vice Chair Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, sir.
Mr. Kokums, I probably don't have too many questions for you. I'm going to spend some time with my my friend, Mr. Keller Kassam, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all.
Mr. Kassam, first of all, I want to congratulate you, similar to past Chair Belzer. It says a lot for the company to bring all these parties together, and no one is objecting to the settlement. So congratulations to you and really all the parties for that.
Thank you, sir. It was a team effort, I assure you.
I can only imagine.
Yes, sir.
What I want to explore with you is how you get to a settlement. And the reason I want to explore that with you is for those of us who are initiated, we have some idea as to what that looks like. And you've done a pretty good job explaining some of that in your initial comments. But for those of us that are watching, and some of the folks in the audience, like my good friend, Miss Doris Fletcher, who may not be as familiar with the ins and outs of when the company files their application, which is their initial request, to the point where we are here today, where all the concessions have been made. And as you mentioned, you listened to the testimony at all of the night hearings, the public
Yes, sir.
hearings, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you recall any of the witnesses maybe alluding to the fact that if you ask for $1, you only really need 50 cents?
Yes, sir. I probably heard about 6 witnesses across those 4 night hearings comment on that. Yes, sir.
Okay. And I appreciate the way you testify and show up. I haven't seen you duck any punches, and I appreciate that. Could you explain to us why that is not the case, that what you asked for in your application, I would think you believe and your counsel believe that the company is entitled to by law, and you stand on that. But for some of the reasons you mentioned, we're here today with this settlement. Could you tell us how you get from what you think you are entitled to where we are today?
Yes, sir. Mr. Vice Chairman, you've hit the nail on the head. The very first thing, who wants to file a rate case? I don't. I mean, it's not popular, and it's not good to sit there and go and listen. And I've got a 90-year-old mom and an 88-year-old dad who live in rural Calhoun County, and affordability is always an issue. And I think about those folks, and whether we were in Bluffton or Charleston or Columbia, I found each of those night hearings so helpful, because I'm kind of a person that tries to, what was the theme from each? And we can talk about that later if you'd like. And then the individual customers that I get to deal with, afterwards. There were some operational issues that came up, so we get to talk to them. But the very first thing you need to understand is I want to file a clean case. There's so many people out there with a misconception that we want to file for $400 million, and then we get 50% of it, and we're happy. But one of the things is, if you go in, and that's one of the reasons why we insisted that we kind of lay out a narrative of what went on. Because when you read this, and you read what is coming out of shareholders, $52 million write-down on materials and supplies, that's hard, very hard. And I'm not getting rid of that material anyway, because guess what? The other day we had a pigeon come in and land on a breaker downtown Columbia. You all might have seen high-rises were out of power. Well, I can assure you, when my linemen went down there to fix it, they didn't go in there and look and see if something was 2.5 years of age or younger. They went out and got something, and the bushings they replaced on that breaker might have been 15 years old. We've got coal-fired plants that were built in the 70s. I assure you, we keep parts in pieces, because number one, these days you can't get them, or you have to spend the time fabricating them, and you can't get them. So that's a big part. If you look at that, everything in here is painful for the company, but we gave up on that because we wanted to reach a settlement. So I feel confident that what we put out there was a clean case, and that was my goal, not to play games. Now, I know people want to come in and they want disallowances and things of that nature, but there was no party that is behind me gathered here today that I felt that we didn't file a clean case, but they also wanted to do their jobs. The Consumer Advocate, the Office of Regulatory Staff, SACE and CCL, Walmart, DOD. Look how diverse that stakeholder group is. And he all came at us with something different. And so Mr. Andrew Bateman, who's the Executive Director, Office of Regulatory Staff, he said, Keller, I want you to have your first term sheet over here to me before rebuttal testimony is filed. I hear you. I took that as an order. And we did. And he will tell you that any time they sent something to us, we turned it around the next day. Didn't matter if it was July the 4th. Didn't matter if it was Juneteenth. Didn't matter if it was on a weekend. And the reason for that is you got to keep momentum. You got to keep momentum. It's kind of like your car, putting it on coast. You got to keep momentum going to keep the process moving forward. And that way, when you do that, everybody starts firing off. This is what's important to me. This is what's important to me. And he had a goal of July the 8th. And I'd like to apologize to this commission for getting this settlement over to you as late as we did. I'm sorry. But it, as you said, and I think Chairman Powers, you said it best than anybody. You've cut many a deal on the steps of the courthouse over your time. And maybe we were right there on the steps of this rostrum as far as cutting this deal. But it was important to keep it moving. And then you put rebuttal testimony over there, and then people get a clearer view of what the parties are bringing to the table from that standpoint, and that is another layer. So it's almost like a wedding cake. You start broad, and then you start building up, and you go to that next level, and things get more concise. You go to that next level, things get more concise, and so on and so forth. But nobody, I have to say, nobody questioned safety or reliability, because they know how important that is to South Carolina. And through all of those different twists and turns right up to the last day, and I'm not going to kid you, there's sometimes we think we make people mad. They may go off a while. They might not answer calls. We start getting worried about it. It's human nature. And how do we bring everybody back in the fold and keep that going? And ORS has done an outstanding job of that. And then there were times like CCL and SACE. We knew what was important to them, and ORS gave us the ability to go and deal directly with them. But always to bring our discussions back to the overall group and keep this moving forward. Keep this moving forward. My biggest disappointment that I have is not having a consumer advocate on board, because they were a large player throughout all of this. And those bill credits are a direct cause or a direct result of those night hearings and the outstanding job that staff did being engaged and supportive of moving to a settlement. They might not signed on to it, but they were an integral part of it. And that's one regret that I do have. I wish they'd have been on. And then CMC Steel, great customer of ours, really rocks our load when they drop those anodes down there and in that scrap steel. But they usually don't typically settle. So I knew that they were probably not going to settle. But it does feel good that they don't oppose. Because to me, sometime when I'm in alone, I say, well, I think we got settlement. I feel like we got settlement. Might not be written technically with everybody's name on there, but gosh, I'm proud to be a part, not of Dominion Energy South Carolina right now in this proceeding, but a part of these stakeholders who represented their interest and their clients extremely well so that we could get to the point where I get up here and mouthpiece it to you, but they answer the questions, but they're really the ones that did it. And then all the data requests, my goodness, like 1,100. And you want to talk about subparts. And so then you got all of your regulatory people, and we don't get to go out and hire people for this. They work a lot of long hours. This gentleman next to me, a lot of hours. His wife works with the company, so she had to do as many data requests. I don't know how his poor daughter, stood it from that standpoint. But, I mean, they work a lot of long hours. All the regulatory folks, all the legal folks, Mr. Burgess interacting with these attorneys. And then, we got to report up to Virginia and try to get them on board too. So it's like you sandwiched in that cookie. So, you got to carry them along the way. So it just takes this communication. And Vice Chairman, you know this as well as I do. Communication takes time, takes effort, and you run the risk of confrontation. If you got enough guts, if you got enough time to devote to it, which they did, all these parties, if you want to put forth effort to really move the regulatory construct in South Carolina forward, because we are at a critical time as far as energy in South Carolina. And then if you're willing to have the courage to face confrontation, to disagree but not be disagreeable, and then to have the intestinal fortitude to endure and try to move forward. And the other thing is, sometimes the best way to alleviate your burden is to alleviate somebody else's burden. And that's the give and take that went on in this process to get us where we are today.
And thank you for that, Mr. Kassam. And just to unpack that a little bit further, it seems to me what you're saying in terms of the parties doing their job is that no one gift wrapped this settlement for the company to give the company what they wanted.
It was a good settlement because I don't think anybody is completely satisfied.
Good. You brought up something that's sort of interesting. I didn't think anyone would bring it up. I hope that someone would, so I'm glad you did. What do you know about what's going on in Houston right now?
Well, we're in the Southeastern Electric Exchange Mutual Assistance, which is an outstanding group. They do a wonderful job. That's where all the mutual assistance comes from. So when we need them here for Hurricane Matthew or Winter Storm Pax, we go in ahead of time, watch the weather forecast, and we put a request on the table. And all of those utilities within the Southeastern Electric Exchange, and when I say Southeast, it is so good at providing resources. We got people in the very northern regions. I'm like, what are they? They ain't in the Southeast. I mean, they might be southeast of Canada, but how'd they get in here? But it's about that mutual assistance. So they called us before that hurricane even got to the Yucatan Peninsula, when they knew that it would knock down and it would come back out of the Gulf as a 1. We put 90 lineman resources, construction, out there for them. Okay, they asked for like 5,000. Then they asked for tree crews, and we offered up a couple hundred tree crews that could go. And when they leave here, we're not paying them. The host utility pays them. So they came back and they said, I think we're good. We just want your vegetation crews. Fine. We released those vegetation crews and they headed out to Houston. And then it's a sense of pride. I like to just kind of sit and watch on 20 and 26 and 95 and see all those crews coming together through here to head down there. Because you know, that's people working together. That's people going to help people that are getting ready to have their lives turned upside down. So we sent them down there. Tree crews, they're engaged, they're working. We found out they got some challenges from a vegetation management standpoint. You go through the time when it hit, Cat 1, 90 mile per hour winds. But man, that Houston is a big old spread out city. And so they went through where they had like 2.7 million customers out, just about all the customers impacted at Centerpoint. Then it kind of came on down, and we always watch it. I mean, that's what we do. Watch our system, watch that system 24/7. And you start seeing it come down. They still got about, when I last checked today, it was still about 250,000 customers out. Well, you know, those people are fit to be tied because it's hot and it's humid and they've had enough. So then the governor comes in, and I think there are always lessons learned that we pay attention. So we talked to our crews that go, because they came back and said, hey, when they got down to like 1 million, they said, we need those line crews. Will you send them? Sure, we will. They hopped on the I-20 and down the road they went. So it's, you know, everybody comes back and then everybody starts pointing fingers. That's what they do. You know, Vice Chairman Williams, and you know, because some people have called you, the same people that complain about us trimming trees are the same ones that complain just as loud when they sit there in the dark. And, you know, that goes hand in hand, so to speak. And I think it's very important. One of the things that I've done in my, I don't care who you know or what you do, we move forward and treat people fairly and consistently. Firm, fair, and consistent. That's what you have to do. You don't cut any favor for somebody who might call you and know or put their thumb on the scale. But anyway, now the governor's gotten involved. I read the articles this morning because I want to look at these utilities. And now they're complaining about they didn't do enough from a vegetation management standpoint. And as a result of that, the trees are all in the wire. I remember Hurricane Sandy? Everybody thought, well, they went up to the north and those people up there, they just don't have hurricanes very often and they don't know how to respond. Well, our crews that went up there to help, they came back and said, man, it took them 2 weeks to cut all the trees off the wire so they could get the wire to put it back up. And that's no way you go through storm restoration. You at least need to have that where you can get to your wire, you can get it back up on the poles and things of that nature. So there are a lot of lessons learned that will come out of that. And just like that winter storm they had down there in Texas, and y'all had different ex parte briefings on it, we're going to learn a lot from what the expectation of the regulator was after the fact, what the legislature and the governor was, and what rules or laws they may promote. And then also, man, the best you can get is the affidavits from those crews that return back to our system to work. And I see them out there in the crew quarter, and I can say, what was it like? How was it? And all of those things that we can learn from and give us discernment as we move forward and what's in the best interest of South Carolina. Don't let any storm or anything else go to waste. That experience is invaluable.
I agree with you, and heaven forbid any natural disaster come to South Carolina and cause that kind of damage to our infrastructure. And I pray for the folks that are suffering and without service in that area. But for the sake of this discussion, I have to ask, during this review period, do you know of any Dominion Energy South Carolina customer that has been without power for 5 days?
I don't believe so, sir, from that standpoint, from a storm. No, sir. Now, I have to go back. Now, don't hold me to that because I'd have to go back and look, but the most recent was like Hurricane Matthew, and it was a good while ago. That was when we had about 356,000 customers out, a lot of it along the coast. That's when all the storm surge took out the Fusky Island and all the underground over there and fried all of that infrastructure, and we had to go back and rebuild it at temporary overhead. Everybody thinks that underground is the panacea, but it ain't. And so it's, at least from that experience. So no, sir, I can't say from a storm that they have. The ones we've had here recently is, man, we got tore up down there in Somerville. We even had a boomer pop up last night in North Charleston, but in 5 days, no, sir. I'd have to go back subject to check. And I think I'd know off the top of my head, and I can't recall that, Vice Chairman Williams.
And is it fair to say that the $1.6 billion that the company has invested and seeking recovery for is to ensure that your ratepayers in your service territory won't have any situations like what they're experiencing in Houston?
Yes, sir. It's for the 2 R's. Reliability, meaning the power don't go out. Okay, we measure that with that system average interruption duration index that I've talked about here, which is an industry standard. The less the minutes, the better. And we're in the top quartile with that. And then the second thing is resiliency. How quickly can that system bounce back when, it's interesting. I mean, when you can't outdo Mother Nature. The power of Mother Nature is unbelievable. And all we can do is sit here, take it, and do our dead level best to recover as quickly as possible. And even with Matthew, with all those customers out, we still got back within about 6 to 7 days. And that was a while ago, not doing this review period. Yes, sir. Resiliency, reliability. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. My last area to cover with you relates to what your shareholders are going to experience based off this settlement. Similar to the past chair, I can't remember a time where we received a settlement where shareholders would be in this position. Could you talk a little bit more about what shareholders or the part shareholders will play in this settlement and how that may be different from past cases?
Yes, sir. Mr. Vice Chairman, I've been at this company. I've been blessed to work at this company for 36 years. I started out long time ago with South Carolina Electric and Gas Company. Went through a lot of ups and a lot of downs. And, it was very impactful for me. A lot of people, everybody wants to talk about nuclear and all this, but what the most impactful thing was me was when they came and took those logos off that bucket truck. And they went from South Carolina Electric and Gas Company to Dominion Energy. Like ripping off a scab. But Dominion Energy has been very good to us. They've been very good to the state of South Carolina. They brought forward a lot of equity and debt to pay down the nuclear that was on that bill. In large measure, there's still some of it out there. But at the same time, we're in an interesting place in South Carolina. Y'all know it. Y'all see it. We got data centers wanting to come here like no tomorrow, and they use a lot of energy. Man, we were blessed with Scout Motors coming up in Blythewood. And, because of the 1,200 acres that was there, and I told our employees this, the CEO of Scout Motors, he said, Keller, because that was a choice between us and Fairfield Electric. And they chose us. And they said, we make decisions based upon trust and based upon price. And we trust you to do what you say you're going to do on behalf of your employees. And man, that was a big shot in the arm. Because you can imagine people have been here as long as I have and the difficulty and the tough things that they've gone through in that regard. But one thing that never failed was safety and reliability. They still went out and did it. They might have gotten cussed out at the Lizard's Thicket or, something along those lines about where we were and where we were headed. So when you come out of the end of that funnel, because it all goes in like this and you get constricted in there and you wonder where you're going, when you come out of that funnel, I applaud Dominion Energy, our company, my company, who decided, you know, South Carolina is a great place to do business. But it's still going to take some give and take for us to be able to get the regulatory construct where it is. Where you've got not just stakeholders, but you've got a commission. You've got legislators. You've got the governor's office. You've got the Secretary of Commerce, where they're all looking together. And they're all hooked up like them Clydesdale to that big old Budweiser wagon, and they're all pulling in tandem. And you know, they decided we might have to take a little bit of pain to do a couple things here. Number one, provide them their needs, the stakeholders, and meet them at least halfway. And they did. From the shareholder, 7.5 million, 52 million, 5 million. Various things along those lines. And you see what shareholders are willing to give up, not just to balance off what comes out of this case, but how they can support the regulatory construct so that somebody from SACE and CCL knows that, hey, renewables are a big part of what we're going to do. We're going to change when we hit the peaks for solar and change those hours around. Maybe for the consumer advocate being a part of this and listening to those night hearings, there's 7.5 million. Or even that material. You think I'm going to get rid of that material? No, sir, I'm not. But it's just not going to be part of rate base, and the shareholders are going to bear that expense and that write-off. And they're willing to make that sacrifice, and I applaud them for that because I went back and forth with my leadership in Richmond in order to get to this point. So I think what they're doing is they're stamping this state that we're glad we're here. It was tough going to start with. Hard to get that plow going in that row and in that furrow. But now that we're going, we don't want it to stop. And that's why we were very serious when we filed a clean case and then wanted to deal with each one of these stakeholders to come to an outcome where South Carolina would know that the regulatory construct is solid. External people would continue to look at South Carolina and want to invest, not with just Scout Motors or BMW or Volvo or battery recyclers or White Claw Brewing, but that people out there would want to invest in this regulatory environment because they see that the returns would come back from their investment as we champion and move South Carolina forward. And that's why this was laid out in this narrative, and that's the reason why these shareholders are willing to make this sacrifice in order to make this settlement come to fruition.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Appreciate you. And
Yes,
thank you
sir.
for your service to this country.
Absolutely. If you want to do me a favor, if you could give Mr. Kokums some vacation time after this, because he looks like he's been working every minute that you've been talking about.
Yeah. His
No
daughter,
offense, Mr.
his
Kokums.
daughter's name is Danica, and she hates my guts because he and his wife have been working their tails off, but that's what all these folks do, and that's what these stakeholders involved in this process have done, as well as the Office of Regulatory Staff, and I know you commissioners as well, so thank you.
Mr. Chair, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Caston?
Thank you, and good afternoon.
Afternoon, sir.
Mr. Sam, I really do appreciate your apology about getting the proposed agreement late. But as I know, it's really not about your convenience or about my convenience or anybody up here. It's about trying to get the right thing done for the right reasons. And if you couldn't handle criticism, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be in the position you're in. And I'm absolutely certain I wouldn't be in the one I'm in. But
No job is too hard for the person that ain't got to do it.
just kind of comes with the turf, and you either take it or you don't.
Yes, right.
Honestly, I think the bulk of the questions I had, there was one I wanted to follow up that Commissioner Belcher asked about the materials and supplies, but I think we got all that covered. I did have some questions, relative to AMI and probably a few other things, but I believe it's more related probably to the testimony, direct testimony and such as that, rather than the settlement testimony.
Yes, sir.
So
I'll be back tomorrow this afternoon with that.
well, that's
yes,
what
sir.
I was going to ask you.
Yes, sir. As Mr. Burgess said, I'll avail myself to you for as long as you want, and Mr. Cocombs will too as well. And he don't need any vacation, so he'll be here.
Well, I don't want it to be any longer than necessary. So I say let's just hit the road running and blow through these things and take some time off. And to be honest, I'd kind of like to do that too. But,
Yes, sir.
But let's finish what we're doing.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. I have nothing until later.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston. Commissioner C. Williams.
Thank you, Chair Powers. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Thank you for the background that you gave in the settlement agreement, as well as the discussion that you had with Vice Chair Williams about the process that you go through for a stipulation or a settlement agreement. As a non-lawyer, and just talking about it generally, it added some detail that I haven't picked up yet. So I really appreciated that, as well as your goal, as well as ORS's goal for the time frame that you intended to meet in this regard. But it was educational.
Thank you, ma'am.
The company uses 100 in the application uses 100 kilowatts as an average for an easy understanding of what a residential use is. Is that what? Do you know what the actual is?
I don't know.
No,
I
ma'am.
meant 1,000. Yes. Thank you.
No, ma'am. I don't.
Okay.
I mean, it varies and varies different times of the year. I'm sorry, I don't have that information, but I might be able to find it and produce it tomorrow on my direct testimony. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Me or Mr. Cocombs or one of our other witnesses can provide you.
I'm
Mr.
just-
Rooks would be good at that.
Okay. That's good to know. And
Yes,
like
ma'am.
others said, just direct me to who I should ask it of, as you've just done.
Yes, ma'am.
And I think the question is just as our households change, as our businesses change, how good is that 1,000 kilowatt number?
I'd say it's still a fair representation. There are a lot of people that are all of these devices that they have to charge up all the time. Somebody's got something plugged up all the time, and that brings a lot. You got some people that have EVs. The adoption has not been as much as I thought it would be when it came out gangbusters. But at the same time, you have to build to different building standards now. And a lot of people do look at energy and try to be more energy efficient, which is a good thing, a great thing. And so I still think because of those reasons, I still think it's good. A TV, for example, used to use a picture tube. It was heavy, and that used a lot of energy. Now you've got these slim profile ones that everybody mounts on the walls. They use nearly as much energy. So, and the SEER ratings on some of your air conditionings and things of that nature. So I think that is still a good bellwether for usage.
Commissioner Williams, I
Yes.
would add that, again, Mr. Rooks would be the ideal witness, but I would point out that using the 1,000 per month is a good apples-to-apples measure. So when you compare different jurisdictions, you have a fair comparison.
That's a good point, and probably when everybody changes. But it's also, I understand that some things are becoming more efficient. We're using more energy in other ways. It's complex. Mr. Kassam, on page 4 of your settlement testimony, you talk about the mention a net of 1% increase for typical residential customers' electric rates. You don't need to look at this, but you're going to know this question. And the beginning of that that statement talks about a fuel cost reduction. Do you know what the increase to the residential customer would be without the fuel cost? Oh,
Yeah, I think I would point you to the settlement agreement page. You said a residential customer, page
Right.
7, section number 9. Gives you the 11.4%. That's a rate 8 customer, which is their typical residential customer.
Thank you. Mr. Kassam, I know that you attended all of the customer public hearings and were down front listening clearly. When we looked at the DMS system and we looked at who testified, there were about 49 customers that testified, witnesses in those hearings, and about 228 protest letters filed. Does that tell you anything? Does that number surprise you? Do you think it's low or high, or what does it say to you?
No, ma'am, not at all. In fact, I wish they'd have been more, because all that feedback was very helpful. And it was very helpful in talking to these stakeholders and interveners as we went through this process. You know, we started out in Aiken, and there were two couples, ironically, that came all the way from New York, two of them, and they located in Aiken at the same time. And one couple, who I went and introduced myself to, they just come from California, like I said. And I said, what brings y'all here? And they said, well, we got this thing in the mail. We didn't know exactly what it was. And so we just, out of curiosity, came here. Said, you know, in California, our bill is 6 times higher than what it is here, and our power goes out all the time. And I was like, well, great goodness, I wish y'all would have got up there and spoke before the commission and testified. You don't get that, you know? The other couple, the gentleman got up and he wanted to know about the pension, and he said, you know, have y'all made bad investments? And so I was able to talk to that and there was another lady that was next to me, and she said, should I get up and testify? I said, yes, ma'am, if you feel comfortable. And then in the middle of the hearing, she came up to me and she said, I think I'm going to go ahead and leave. I talked to the ORS person and out front, because we had customer service and ORS was there and the consumer advocate was there, and that's why we're there. I think we ought to have those things on a, you know, every now and then we ought to have an annual one and allow the customers to come, because it was helpful. And so she said, I'm going to do it online. I said, whatever you're comfortable with, ma'am. But then that gentleman got up there, and after he finished, he expected to get answers. He expected y'all to be able to answer his questions, and that's a big frustration. And y'all could answer the questions, but it's frustration. It's frustrating for me not to be able to answer the questions. And so we went through everything that makes up his rates. Rate base, fuel, pension, DSM, the whole 9 yards, to give him an understanding of where it was all coming from. We were able to answer his questions. Then we went down to Bluffton. And there were 2 elderly ladies that made an impression upon me because they live in the town, the old town of Bluffton, what we call Old Bluffton. Well, Bluffton's the highest growth area we got on our system, 10%, growing like crazy. You go down there to Del Webb. I remember we went down there to Del Webb to serve it, and man, you could ride through Del Webb in 5 minutes. Now it's miles and miles and miles of people who have relocated there. But they were kind of getting pushed out because of all the folks that are located down there. Taxes are going up, you know, groceries are going up, everything is going up, and that wasn't lost on me in that regard. And I was glad afterwards they went over there to our customer service rep, and they were able to talk about DSM and then their accounts and how they could structure payment on their accounts to help spread it out so that it fit with what was going on with what they had income coming in. There were operational things where the guy got mad because he said the fire chief said that the fire in the garage was the result of the battery-powered, you know, toy for the child. And he wanted to know why when the fire chief told us to put the meter back on, we didn't put it back on. He was upset about that. And I was like, well, until the county does an inspection and cuts us loose, we don't restore electric or gas service. But as soon as the county does, to make sure all the breakers and the wires are safe, make sure all the pipe, they might do an air test on the gas pipes, then we put it back on. He understood that. He did. You know, went to Charleston. Charleston was amazing. And I know that's your district. I guess I'm able to say that, but all of that's your district. And you know, the theme of that was amazing because you get people, of course, that are on fixed income. And I'll tell you something that came out of it in Columbia and Charleston. A lot of people started talking about, hey, instead of coming in and having one of these larger increases, and you're making these investments that you talk about, and we're on fixed income, why don't you see about doing something each year instead of just the shock? Kind of like boiling the frog. I mean, don't just throw it in the boiling water, he jumps out. Can we just do it along the way? And it's very similar to what we have with our Rate Stabilization Act on the gas side. Mm-hmm. And so are there routine investments that we make on the system, generation, distribute? And that got me thinking about that. That was a theme that kind of came out of that. The other thing is DSM. Now, we're a utility, and I can quickly go out there and I can look at the point of demarcation and I can see the weatherhead coming up, the meter can, and I know where we stop, I know where it starts. But there are a lot of people in Charleston. It's affordable housing crisis for everybody moving down there. And there were a lot of young people that came down there, which that was encouraging. And they're renters. And they're saying we can't do anything from a DSM standpoint if our landlord doesn't do anything. So that got me thinking. That was great feedback from the night hearings. And then if you listen to them, then there's got to be a line between what do we do from a DSM, and Miss Cheryl Shelton is here, and she can talk about that with her testimony, and they do a tremendous job, a wonderful job. Now, like me, they don't like getting the frowny face and the smiley face about what they're, I mean, it makes them mad if they get that straight face instead of the smiley face based upon their usage. But anytime somebody calls me about that to complain about us using postage to send that out and whatnot, I get with Miss Shelton, and she always sends a representative out there, and they always call me back and say, man, those were delightful, and all of those have come to a good outcome, I can assure you, when those customers call me, and they do. And so it's where do we start? How can we reach more to low income? How can we reach over to renters who are paying astronomical rent in Charleston? What can we do about that? And that's something that really, really resonated with me from that standpoint. And yeah, coming in here to Columbia, I'm going to listen close to the veteran that spoke that evening and his wife, and I talked to them afterwards and thanked him for his service. But he's on a fixed income, and that really made the rate stabilization hit home to me because he was balanced. He talked about having to keep the lights on. He talked about having to make the investment. He wasn't upset about that. Just like, well, can you spread it around a little bit so it doesn't hit us all at one time? And I took that to heart as I talked to him and his wife out in the parking lot. And I think those are things that are opportunities and challenges for us going forward. And what's the right answer? I don't know. But I think it's going to take the same cooperation that we had that brought this settlement before you today to continue that dialogue. And you know what? I want y'all to be a part of that as well. This is the only time I get to talk to y'all. The only time. I mean, great goodness. I mean, I wish y'all could come to system control and see how they sit there and people talk about fuel and say, we really don't have anything to do with that. Yeah, we do every day. Those system controllers are accountants on the hour. They know exactly what the generating cost of those units are. And they make sure that the lowest cost is out there on the system unless there are stringent voltage requirements that are carried. So I have to say those night hearings, they were as eye-opening as ever. And as y'all know, I wanted to sit as close to the speaker as possible on the front row. I wanted to sit at wrap attention, made sure my back didn't touch the back of that chair so they know that I was focused and intently listening. And I followed what Mr. Burgess put forward when he said, we appreciate you being here. I want them to know I respect them. I appreciate them. We got a tough job. They have tough things that have happened to them in their lives. And we need to so orient ourselves to be compassionate in order to try to meet the needs as best we can. Because we're all in this together. And that's what I took out of those. There are other things that I could go into detail. The gentleman out in Hopkins that said, well, y'all can come and cut the primary. We'll let you you want to get through my yard to get to the transformer, but not my line out there. See, always tell them the silver wire, that's the high voltage wire. Usually it's backlighter on the street. That's the one that we go in and put on the 5-year trim cycle and take care of. The service drop going to the house, which is 2 coated leads with a concentric neutral in the middle. If we're out there cutting on a 5-year cycle, we might cut 1 foot around that. But if you want it cut, we are more than happy at your discretion to come out there, drop that wire off your house, drop it off the transformer, cut whatever trees you want. We'll hook it back up that same day. And so that's something we need to do a better job of educating our customers. One of the things that we've done is put something out on our website so they can actually see what is the service drop. Commissioner Belzer did a good job of further questioning that because she knew what the deal was. But we need to educate our customers better about that from that standpoint. So just good old South Carolina, get together, hash out your issues, put it out there, and then as a family within the Palmetto State, let's see what we can do in order to address those needs while at the same time making sure that we can invest to keep this system safe and reliable to serve their needs. Because I'll tell you, when they complain the most, it's not about DSM. It's not about tree trimming. It's not about not being able to have a dock on the lake or whatever. It's about when they're sitting there in the dark and the power's out. That's universal. And that's what we got to keep the focus on from that standpoint. Hence the reason we're here, hence the investments that we make. Proud of our safety, very proud of our reliability, for dang sure.
Thank you for that recounting of the customer public hearings. And thank you for starting with, you wish that more people had been there. And for recognizing that this is the one time we can talk. So in response to that, what do you think we can do differently with regard to customer public hearings to engage more and good? Because it is an educational opportunity, and some of the dialogue, there was much I wished that someone could have interacted to explain things. But what can we do better?
We just need to replicate Miss Cheryl Shelton and her staff, because when they go out and do the new the neighborhood energy efficiency programs, and she can talk more about that. When we go in places like Allendale, down in Calhoun County where I'm from, and these folks in these rural areas that feel like there's no connectivity there, there's no presence there. One thing that I'm real proud of is we still have linemen and electricians and plant personnel that are in these rural communities. They're part of that community to keep the diners open, they keep the laundromats going, and I'm real proud of that from that standpoint. And they do a lot in the community, our employees do, as far as, just supporting those communities, be it the schools, be it the churches, be it the Cub Scouts, Girl Scouts. So I'm real proud of what our employees still do. A lot of people don't see that. I see it every day. We have our Dollars for Doers, where if they work in the community for a charitable cause, we'll make a donation on their behalf if they get a certain amount of hours, and I love that. I think we just need to do more in the underserved communities. I mean, Charleston's Charleston. I mean, when I was at the Citadel, Charleston was when you look at it today, it's like driving in a tunnel, going down Meeting Street. So much has changed. And so many people have been displaced. Mm-hmm. And affordable housing is an issue. And what can we do to help people here in South Carolina? And I think that neighborhood energy efficiency program is a start. And I really think the next time we go, the customer service folks need to be there with Cheryl and her team to go through and look at these customers that are going through a tough time, and make them aware of the entire complement of tools that we have available to them to help them become more disciplined in their energy usage, because I think that's important. I don't know from a commission perspective. I mean, I respect what the legislature did when they set everything up with the Office of Regulatory Staff being the intermediary. I don't like the fact that I can't, I'm very careful, and y'all, they ask you every year, any ex parte? No, there's no ex parte, none. Never had any from anybody on this commission. We all going to follow the law. Man, I sure do wish you could come out and see a 30-day supply of coal on a coal pile. You can see how compact a natural gas plant is. Get 31 acres sitting there at Columbia Energy, how clean and efficient it is. Wish you could see those things. It's too much bureaucratic morass, and I apologize to my attorney for saying that, but it's just too much you have to go through for y'all to be able to come out and be able to see that. And I think that education is important. I think you need to see it. I think you need to see a solar farm. I think you need to be in system control when solar intermittent goes off at the end of the day, and what happens. I think you need to see the pumps come on at Fairfield Pump Storage to get through it. I think you need to see how we change the operations of all of our units in order to be able to meet our customers' needs, because it's more challenging every day. I'm proud of how much solar we have on our system, 1,200 megawatts out of 5,000 megawatts. Put that up against any utility in the nation. That's a pretty strong percentage. So I'm glad we've embraced that, but I just wish that there was more dialogue that we could have instead of just this, and y'all could kind of see behind the curtain and see what goes on every day and what our employees do to serve their neighbors.
Thank you.
Yes,
Going
ma'am.
back to the customer public hearing, has there been any follow-up between the company and those individuals that testified since that evening?
Oh, yes, ma'am. Miss Cindy Hucks that was there, she's told me regularly. The customer service people, that's a source of pride. They said, you know, the little old ladies in Bluffton. I said, yes, I do. I remember them. They had an impact on me. They said, well, they came over to the table and we have followed up with them, not that night, but telephonically back to them in order to have a conversation from that standpoint. So, yes, ma'am, I know for a fact because those employees that were there and our customer assistance and that customer service, they take their jobs very seriously, helping people. Yeah, costs have gone up. What costs haven't gone up? I mean, I can't go to, I won't say the restaurant, but I can't go with a menial thing. I used to try to get by eating lunch for less than $5. I can't do that anymore. I mean, it's $9 every time out your pocket. Everything's gone up. Food's gone up. Vehicles have gone up. Price of bucket truck gone up 35 and 40%. It's unbelievable. Diesel fuel, tires. It's amazing what things copper. Oh my goodness. Stranded aluminum. It's amazing if you can get it. And the lead times to get transformers. So it's very, very, very difficult times. And we need to do our part. I think we can do better. I really do. I think we can do better. I think that we can have I think we can bring more customer assistance along with our NEAT program. And I know we have a presence. Maybe advertise it better. Maybe work through some of the churches. I mean, churches in the community can still get people together in South Carolina.
Right.
I think that's important. I've talked to Reverend Charles Jackson from time to time about recruiting as well as having NEAT programs over there. We've done a lot of work over there at Lakeview Empowerment Center. And we have a lot of philanthropic work we do. Maybe we go over to Harvest Hope. We give a lot to Harvest Hope. Maybe we go over there and set up a booth at Harvest Hope when the people are coming in there. Because if they're struggling for food, that they're struggling to pay their power bill. So I think there are a lot of things that we can do if we think and work together.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
One of the themes that I heard, and I wonder if you heard it, was that current customers should not have to pay for additional system demands resulting from new growth in the Dominion Energy South Carolina territory. Did you hear that as part of the testimony, and do you have any comments on that?
You know, that's a utility. Everybody says, well, you know, if somebody's in our assigned territory and it's their primary residence, we might have to run 3 miles down there to serve them. And then you look on the contrary and you look and you say, well, you build a subdivision and you only have to run service lines and you can joint trench with gas and you only got to run like 50 feet. That's a big difference. 3 miles, 50 feet. That's just how it's set up, where it all kind of comes together in the same bucket and gets sorted out. The industrial customers, I've heard a lot about that. They pay their fair share. They pay for the infrastructure upgrades that we have to make on transmission or substation. They either pay it up front and write us a check for it so it's not subsidized by another class of customers, or they agree to certain demand charge components to be put in their bill where they pay it off of a period of time with a termed contract. And as a result of that, it all works itself out. And then we get together as stakeholders and look at that class assignment of cost and percentages and things of that nature. And that's typically how it works. So yes, ma'am, I heard it. I don't expect people to understand it. But it is what it is, and it's something we live every day.
Just looking at my notes. I guess in particular, thinking about that same conversation, from a data center perspective, are there cost causation issues that we all need to be thinking about in response to customers' concerns there, that they not bear the cost of anyone else's service?
Yes, ma'am. I think, you know, we only have one data center on our system, and they ain't even started up producing whatever it is they produce. They hadn't started taking power from us. How about that?
Okay.
And they're paying their way. That's all I can confirm. They're paying their way. And so people can say, well, this, that about them, but they're paying their way. And so I don't see how anybody can complain about that. They contributed to tax base in the county. There's all this about they're sucking all the energy away, and yeah, they are large energy users. And I am concerned about the capacity. That's why I always get the forecast here like this week. Things are tight. Man, if we have a unit out there burp today, it's impactful. We're in conservative operations. We don't touch our transmission because we don't want to take anything out. We tell the folks in the power plants, just leave them alone. Don't go out there and do anything. Don't do any maintenance. Just let them sit there and hum and purr, and hopefully we can get through that until we get load break, and then we can go in there and do the work we need to do. So the problem is not what the data centers bring to the system or what they take away from it, or is there any cost burden that's aligned or associated with anyone else. It's just that we got to figure out this generation going forward. And that's another thing we better be working on just as intently as we work on demand side management, low income customers, and what we can do for them to conserve energy. We better be looking at it from the standpoint of what's the next block of dispatchable generation. I wish it could all be solar and come straight from the Lord and the sun. But you know what? That's not how it works. That's not reality. That's not physics. And, when that sun goes down, you can see the other units ramp up. We put Jasper and Columbia Energy on auto sync with solar, and it works to pick it up. And yeah, can you have more solar? Yeah, but you better pair it with something. Pair it with something. And so I think that's a big thing. But no, ma'am, Commissioner Williams, I do not see from my experience where there is any type of cost allocation that becomes burdensome to our existing customers in that regard.
Well, just your testimony that they are paying their way is good to hear.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Caston wants to follow up on that.
First of all, I assume that your rates do consider all those things and paying for themselves. And I think you were alluding to this just now. While they may be, these companies are paying for the effect on the system, there's still an effect on the system, which would require, I'm assuming, additional generation. And that's kind of something going forward, looking down the road, and I know we got an IRP coming up soon. Is there adequate planning relative to this growth?
Yes,
I'm
sir.
not looking 5 years.
I'm sorry.
10 years, 15.
Yes, sir. Well, first of all, everybody wants to focus on the big loads. And what caused us to build Jasper? What caused us to take on Columbia Energy? Was it one in particular customer? I don't know. Was it all of the subdivisions that are going on in Lexington? Was it everything with the Army investing over in Augusta with Fort Gordon, making it its cyber headquarters, and all the growth in North Augusta? Is it Bluffton? Is it Charleston? All those things go into it. It isn't just one customer. It's all those subdivisions. Our integrated resource plan, I have confidence in it. I think there's solar and their batteries there. Gosh, I hope the batteries get more reliable. We only got one solar farm that's got batteries on it right now, and I hope they get more reliable as far as being able to store energy and release it. We've got a natural gas plant that everybody's heard about and talked about. It might be a joint venture with Santee Cooper. It's certainly not a part of this case, but it is in our integrated resource plan. There's the tendency to maybe delay some of the quick closing of our coal assets, because I promise you, with the weather like it is right now, if somebody said shut down coal today, I'm going to the farm because we won't be able to keep the power on. We just won't. And so, we've extended some of the life of coal. We've looked at peakers, and we're doing peaking modernization to upgrade at Parr and Bushy Park, and potentially doing a full source RFP at Urquhart. And all of those things give me great confidence. There's a lot of talk about small modular reactors. I'm not smart enough to know anything about that other than what I read. And I keep reading a lot about it from that perspective, and I hope that is a solution going forward. People talk about hydrogen. I look at hydrogen and say, Costs too much to get the fuel and to get there. You use as much energy getting the hydrogen as you do when you do anything with it. So I think the IRP is sufficient, but the IRP doesn't guarantee an outcome. It just evaluates all options. And I think it is a document that puts all of our minds together to keep all options on the table as we go forward. And everybody needs to be open-minded to it. And I think energy efficiency and demand-side management is just as integral a part of that.
I understand, and you actually answered my question earlier, and I feel like we're getting in the weeds and getting off the subject.
That doesn't matter.
Man, I got a ton of stuff on that, but let's put that over here.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I'll be here. You let me know.
Well, probably for another hearing another day, but
yes, sir.
We'll do that. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Commissioner Caston.
But picking up on Commissioner Caston's lead, who pays for that generation, that next generation? You've got the current system being paid for. You've got the next industrial customer or the next 100 residential. How is that accommodated? And I'm asking from the perspective of what I heard from customers feeling like this growth was happening on their backs. So I'm trying to kind of lead you to that answer.
It's hard to answer. It's no different than taxes. It's no different than infrastructure. If you've ridden down I-26 and look at what they're doing on either side of it, I mean, it's remarkable the transformation that's going on, and the system pays for it. Now, how you allocate those costs, it doesn't really, that's the key to it. How's it allocated? That was a big part of this case. And so it really comes down to the cost and the expenses are going to be there. The regulatory mechanism is set up for prudently incurred costs to be passed on in the form of rates. And customers pay those rates. And so then it becomes a matter of how are those expenses and percentages assigned. And I think that's the key to it. And I don't have an answer for that. People say, oh, well, you're doing this just because all these people are coming in here. And yeah, there are a lot of people out there that, have kind of said, we need to take the welcome signs up in South Carolina because we're ruining and what makes it so special. And, but you know what? I don't particularly, it's like you said, Commissioner Caston, it's not popular. People cuss me and all this other type stuff over things we have to do, and that's okay. It's part of the job. If I can't handle it, I need to go home. But I will tell you that it's just part of my job. It's just a job. You just do it. And my job is to make sure we've got enough generation, got the capacity to carry it, and that we can deliver it wherever those service points may be. If it's a data center, if it's a mobile home, if it's a subdivision, if it's a restaurant, that's what our job is.
So we also had testimony in the customer public hearings about energy efficiency and Dominion's kind of maybe it wasn't Dominion, maybe it was South Carolina and where we are when looked at nationally. I want to give you a chance to respond to those comments. And I also want to say that I recall someone talking about different standards in Virginia. And I think the blower door test may have come up at that point.
Yes, ma'am. Like I said, I'm learning more and more about this, and it's been good. Virginia is a different regulatory structure, and costs are you're able to recover costs in different mechanisms. And perhaps there's a flavor for some type of rider program down here where we could do all of those particular things and introduce that and look at it specific for that. If you want us to take the time to hook up a flow and capture test on somebody's ductwork, you can do it. Takes time. It's expensive. The other thing is, there were also people there who talked about energy efficiency that haven't applied for us to come out and help them with energy efficiency. So, you kind of got to put your heart where your mouth is. And we'd be more than happy to go to their house. We've never turned down anyone. And so you get some of that as well. But once again, if we want to be more prescriptive, I think that's something that we can evaluate. Cheryl does an outstanding job with her stakeholder group, and we do have a stakeholder group, and they do bring things there. They evaluate those programs on an economic basis. And there's some of them they say, if you look at them on pure economics, you'd say, well, let's do away with them. But no, because some of the ones that might not score on the economic basis are the ones where we have the most participation and contact from our customers. And I don't think you need to lose that touch point, because that's the benefit, what benefit we got out of the night hearing. So if we want to be more prescriptive on that, if we want to take some lessons learned in other areas, then that's probably something that we can look at. People have talked to me about Dominion Energy Virginia having a strategic undergrounding program. And, they say, well, why don't we have that here? Because everybody thinks, well, your power stays on if you're underground. That ain't always the case. In fact, it's 6 times longer to recover it. And so there are different programs that we can look at within the demand side management. And if we want to look across, it's always, instead of thinking it of your own, it's always easy to copy somebody else's if you can. And I think maybe that's something we need to look at in that regard. And I think that might hold potential. But we need to remember, lead a horse to water, can't make it drink. And so, people got to be willing to allow people to come in their house. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them don't want to clean up the house. I'll just tell you, I've dealt with it. I don't feel like cleaning up my house for them to come into my house. I'm embarrassed for them to see it. And I said, well, they don't care. They'll come in there and look at it anyway. So there are a variety of reasons that we have to deal with customers that I talk to on a regular basis. But I think those are things that we can probably look to and accommodate accordingly.
Okay. Is it directly on that? Let's come back to it. This is my last question from the customer public hearing. One customer witness suggested that the company create executive compensation programs based on factors like cost reduction initiatives, operation performance measures, and customer satisfaction. What's your response to that idea?
I've been here 36 years. I've never asked for a job, never asked for a raise, never didn't mind me as far as how it's structured. So you know what? If it was based on that, I'd be fine with it. I can assure you every day we go out and try to do it as cheap as we possibly can. People get on me because they say I'm just too frugal and too cheap, but that's just how I grew up. I don't participate in a lot of things in South Carolina because I don't want to spend the money and because I know who pays for it. And so I think that's I have a fiduciary responsibility to these customers that's right up there with safety and reliability. You also have to know that we're trying to be as efficient as possible for those investors. And they have expectations of what we do from an O&M expense standpoint. They're not mutually exclusive. They're rightly lay on top of each other. So that doesn't bother me. And safety, reliability, E4D, which is a forced outage at one of our power plants, it's already a part of my compensation. So it doesn't bother me. Bring it on. And like I said, if I don't like the compensation structure, I'm free like anybody else to go somewhere else and find another job if I think I can do better. But I tell you, I don't work here anymore because of the money. I'm 58 years old. I got 36 years of service. I stay here because I go crazy if I don't know anything else. And I love my family of employees that go out and serve customers every single day. And the reason I'm still here is I ain't leaving them. So I'm going to stick around as long as they'll let me stick around. And then I'm headed to Calhoun County, and y'all can come see me. I'll be the one with a 1,000-gallon propane tank and a quart of firewood.
So earlier, Commissioner Belzer was asking you about the $7.5 million bill credit. And I think you talked about it from an allocation perspective. But what about from a timing perspective? And what about from a impact to to those that are making bills, paying bills? And I'm thinking about when this goes into effect, is there a time where that rolls off, or is it somehow spread out? Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yes. Okay. So it's a one-time bill credit that will be applied based on, it'll be allocated, weighted according to the increase as specified in the settlement agreement, and it'll go to the residential and the small general service customer. So each customer in each class will get the same amount of credit. Okay. And it'll be a one-time credit That'll come in September, maybe October,
Okay.
depending on how quickly we can get it done.
How will you message that?
I don't know the answer to that. It'll be some type of communication.
Will it be a line item that indicates it's a credit? I'm just thinking about people responding to their bills. They go down, then they come back up.
So I can't answer that question, but there's a company witness all who will be up here later today or tomorrow who can share with you the details of how that'll actually work on their bill.
Okay.
Yeah, that's Craig All. He can answer that.
Thank you. I have some more questions that I'm going to kind of looked at the previous rate settlement agreement and have some questions from that. So I'm going to keep going and appreciate everybody sticking with me, but I just wanted to tell you that from a timing perspective. In the last rate case, the parties reached a settlement agreement. There would be a stakeholder process that would look at electricity affordability for low-income customers. Can either of you describe kind of how that was accomplished, the level of engagement, or suggest who could address that?
So we did have several meetings on that with several stakeholders, I think most of which are party to this case, that evaluated that. I can't speak directly to the outcome of it.
And I guess I wondered, given what's in the settlement agreement, how those pair or maybe informed each other?
I think witness Shelton would probably be the best person to direct those questions to.
Okay. And that may be the answer to the rest of my questions, but I want to go ahead and get them out there.
Yeah, I think Ms. Shelton or either Mr. Rooks would be able to answer those questions when they come forward. I apologize.
We learned the hard way. We got to ask the first people out there and then redirect. And it lets y'all know, things that we're looking at and curious about. One of the settlement terms also talked about enabling legislation that you were going to work on that was necessary to implement a program, for low-income customers. And what I recall is you filed a report or two with us, and I have to admit I could not find it. And I also recall some discussion about an Ohio program that existed. Can anybody respond to that? Does that ring a bell?
It does, and the Ohio program does. I seem to recall that. I apologize once again. I would think Mr. Rooks or Ms. Shelton coming up would be able to answer those questions. And the good thing is they're listening, so they're here. They'll be prepared to answer it, whether they are right now or not.
Right. I'm looking at the rest of these and thinking that I can hold some of this for them. There was a commitment last time to a $15 million in shareholder dollars to forgive pro rata share balances more than 60 days past due, and up to $15 million to fund a combination energy efficiency upgrades and critical health and safety repairs. Did that inform the settlement agreement that we have before us today? The results of that?
Any of that certainly did. It's just like the night hearings. Anything is a touch point where you can draw information on that in that regard. And I think you see in the settlement we have now that it goes beyond just NEEP to the health and safety if we need to. And I think a lot of that was formed based upon the outcome of that settlement at the time in that last rate case when we appeared before you.
Should I ask Ms. Shelton and Mr. Rooks in terms of impact from that
Yes, ma'am.
settlement? Okay. Storm cost. I think what I want to ask is just a bigger picture question about storm cost, understanding what's in the settlement agreement. But can anybody address what those storm costs have been, for example, since the last rate case? Understanding I'm sure there were impacts in 2015, 16, and 17 because of the storms that we had, one on top of another. Who should I ask, or what have those storm costs been during this time frame since the previous case?
So I can speak to what the average has been over the last, I think, 10 years. I don't know that I can speak specifically to since the last rate case. But as you know, we have a deferral mechanism in place where the first $2.5 million of storm costs in any calendar year are O&M costs. Anything over that $2.5 million is deferred. It's kind of put in a bucket off to the side. And that 10-year average is about $7 or $8 million per year that we have deferred.
And then what happens to that as a result of the settlement?
So I'll walk you through what the settlement does for storm costs, and then maybe I can share with you an example that hopefully will kind of tie it all together. So what we've done with the settlement agreement is we've taken the existing storm costs that we've already incurred, and kind of putting those off to the side. There's about $45 million of a regulatory asset that we have in rate base that we're basically stopping. And in the last rate case, the commission allowed for a $4.5 million amortization on that reg asset. So that'll kind of get put off to the side, which means in 10 years, that'll go to zero. So from this point forward, once this, if this settlement is approved, we will be collecting $1.5 million in new storm costs, and any new deferrals will get put in a new bucket, if you will. So let me give you an example. Hopefully we'll pull it all together. So if storms go, or if rates go into effect in September, let's just fast forward to the end of September 2025. So hypothetically, within 2025, if we have $3 million of storm costs, the first 2.5 of that will be O&M. $500,000 will be deferred. So since the new mechanism will be in place for 12 months, we would have collected $1.5 million. So you have $1.5 million of collected, $500,000 of deferral, which means we have a $1 million regulatory liability on our balance sheet.
But did you just tell me that the average is?
Can I ask a question on that?
7 to 8 million a year for over the past 10 years.
Yes, that's correct.
I just want to make sure we're on the same line. Mr. Cocombs, are you explaining the storm damage reserve account that's being requested and which is addressed in the settlement agreement?
I was trying to explain both of them, the existing one that is in rates and the new one.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we were all on the same page. All right,
Yes.
Thank you.
And I'm just interested I understand there's like a $100 million cap where you then have agreed to look at whether you need securitization.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just concerned from the angle of, you said 10 years, average of about 7 to 8 million a year, how that could add up over time. But that suggests that we've got a good 10 plus years before we're looking at that cap for future discussion.
That's exactly right. So with history, kind of showing us what it might be in the future, we fully expect that we'll have another regulatory asset that we'll be accumulating money in, and we'll have to address that in a future rate case.
Of course, we could hope for no storms, but I'm being a little bit more realistic in my line of questioning. I think I've got a question or two more, but I really need to I can ask you tomorrow. So I'm going to hold for now and see what those other questions were. So
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Commissioner
Appreciate it.
Williams.
Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you, and good afternoon.
Afternoon, sir.
And I'd just like to start out by saying thanks to all of the people that were at the public hearings. see a lot of other people in the room that were there, and there are a lot of people that were there that are not here today, but appreciate everybody's effort on those public hearings, and a lot was covered and a lot came out. Mr. Kassam, you mentioned just a little while ago the tree trimming and the cycles and the willingness or ability to help customers with their own lines. And is anything done to help communicate that to customers in terms of when is the cycle and when you might, because 5 years is a long time.
Yes, sir.
People trying to plan. Just, is there anything that can kind of help customers to get in sync on that?
Oh, yes, sir. In fact, directly feedback from our foresters and arborists that work in the field, we did put the schematic up on our website that people can look at, and they can also be directed by our customer assistance and customer service folks if they call in, so they can get a schematic and they can see how we're going to trim. One of the things that I learned 20-something years ago was you can't have somebody say, well, I didn't know. They got to be informed. And so we go in and we have meetings in the different municipalities where we'll be trimming. And we have public meetings. They are poorly attended, but at least the municipality is there, and we give them a single line. And we let them know when we'll begin trimming. We let them know where. We let them know the contractor who will be there doing the trimming. And then we provide them with the number of our arborists and foresters that are in the field if they have any questions, and they are able to make an in-person appointment with any of those arborists or foresters there at their place to make a determination of what we're going to trim and have an understanding of it. The schematic that I mentioned is important on our website because the gentleman that was here in Columbia, out in Hopkins and Lower Richland, that talked about, well, you come to trim this, but you won't come and trim this, and I've called several times and you're rude to me and you won't come out there. That has to do with the service line going up to the house. And I will tell you that, in those instances, when we go out there and we're already out there on the 5-year cycle with the high voltage lines, we'll go in and we do maybe a foot around there where we get more clearance on the others because you don't have to. It's coated wire. And so, and sometimes it grows up in there. A lot of times it's all this communication cable and telephone. And so they call in and they say, hey, these trees are all grown up in my lines. I'll even have a guy say, hey, you cut my trees, but you're letting my neighbor over here, you're letting it grow up in his. Why'd you cut mine? And I said, well, send me a picture of it. And this day and age, you give them, they can send you a picture. It really works out well. And they'll send me a picture and I say, that's cable TV and telephone. And they say, oh, okay. So, there's a difference there. You just got to communicate from that standpoint. Yeah, 5 years is a long time, but we have interactions on a regular basis where on that service drop, if they call in and they want to cut a tree down, have a private tree contractor do it or do it themselves, and they don't want to strip it down off the weatherhead, we'll go out there on an intermediate basis and we'll drop that line and accommodate them and then hook them right back up. And that's no charge to them.
Okay. So, again, getting back to the public hearings and hearing from customers, and to me, there were like two groups of low-income customers that I kind of identified as two separate groups. And one was the ones we keep hearing from, the senior citizens on fixed income Social Security. And then the other would be the general low-income people that we have a lot of in South Carolina. And I'm just kind of thinking about the timing of the increase. You all get to established when it starts. And I know there is no good time. It doesn't matter when you do it. Be very unhappy people. But I guess what I'm wondering, would it make any sense to do an increase in the January time frame or at least give Social Security people the option? That's when they get their increase. Just a thought. I don't know. Just trying. Again, that's heavy usage time of the year, so it could make it worse too. I don't have the solutions either. Just some thoughts and questions.
Yes, her timing is everything. I mean, the timing of the fuel decrease, it came down about $14. That was advantageous to them because going into the summer, that really helped. That helped a lot. And like we always say, it's all about balance, and there's never a good time for an increase. Keeping everything in balance. And as far as coming in for those increases, I go back to what Commissioner Williams brought up about the night hearings. One of the things, like I said, it wasn't lost on me, was the impact of the degree of it and how the timing of it may actually work better if it was an annual type increase as opposed to one that comes even every 4 years, because it eliminates the shock value out of it. And I, quite frankly, personally, I like the idea of that. And I never really thought about it on the electric side like we have on the gas side, but it is something that gave me pause to think as I sat there and listened to those same different folks that you talked about that came in and talked about their personal situation as it relates to that. The thing that I will tell you is, if you would go and be able to sit in one of our contact centers, I think you'd be impressed with how many of those customers call in. And our people are very sympathetic, very patient, very empathetic of the situation that they're in, and do everything they can in order to help them make payment arrangements. And then we have a lot of 501c3s in South Carolina, a lot of churches too, that actually have funds that are available to help them pay their bills. And that connectivity that they have, that's a good outreach that our company puts forward in working with those customers.
And you're talking about the gas rate stabilization. That would probably take a legislative change to get on that system, and obviously that's something that we don't have anything to do with. But I was wondering if the company could voluntarily say, we're going to put 1/3 of the increase in this year, another 1/3 next year, and the last 1/3 the next year. That might be something that the company could do that doesn't require a legislative change. And just wondering if that would be something that would be worth thinking about.
We certainly can think about it. It goes, like we talked about before, we have invested this money. We have investors that have invested in this system, and it's about being able to get them, a return. And it is only when you're sitting there earning 4%, your ability to finance and attract capital is going to be slim to none. And it is about a balance. I certainly know with your background, you realize that from that perspective. And, we have stakeholders that maybe not are here in the room that we have to represent as well when it comes to those investments too, that can cause ill effects to the regulatory construct in South Carolina. But if you make a request in your position for us to think about it and consider it, then I think it's certainly something we can think about and give consideration to, because there was a myriad of things sitting there in those night hearings that made me pause and give thought to.
Yeah, I realize it'd be a whole different cash flow issue, and could be that there'd be some earnings on the balance that hadn't been collected yet. I don't know. I hadn't thought all the way through it.
Well, I'd also say, you look at the shareholder thing that Vice Chair Williams asked me about. You got $52 million, you got $7.5 million, all shareholder dollars. And then you flip around and say, okay, we'll postpone the rates. I know when we went through the fuel increases that we had, and they came to me and they said, Well, some folks came to me and said, well, let's kick the can down the road. We'll give you carrying costs. And I was like, let's just go ahead and, get through it and gut through it. And we did. And as a result of that, it was a collaborative effort, but it resulted in that significant of an increase that kind of offsets this. It was a significant of a decrease, that kind of offsets this increase. And that's why you see the 1%. And people say, well, it's 11, whatever. But really, when you take those two in account, they're only paying 1% more than they did 6 months ago. So that really worked out well in making that decision and not kicking the can.
Right, and I understand that the fuel case comes up every year. And
yes, sir.
Could go the other way next year.
That you're exactly right, and I've seen it in my years. Yes, sir.
Right. I don't believe it was in this case, but a public witness made a comment at one. It may have been a different case about that we have a lot of second homes in South Carolina. A lot of people that have places at the beach or the mountains or the lake or whatever. And there was some sort of a comment, well, like, can you adjust the rates for those people if somebody has the money to have a second home? Could those people be paying a little bit higher rate? And then you do another different rate structure that could be specifically geared to customers that are the more low income people. In other words, it'd be a rate design issue. Does that make any sense?
It does. I mean, I see, with taxes, somebody with a second home, you pay out to hang if it's not your permanent residence, from that perspective. I don't know. I mean, I think about those young people that came in there in Charleston and they talked about their landlords. And I'd be scared to get into that because what if that landlord's place is considered a second home, so to speak, that they're renting out, and you popped them with that, and then they put it upon the backs of those young people that are already paying those exorbitant rent amounts down yonder, particularly in Charleston. And you're asking me cold on that, but that's my first thought in thinking about those young people down in Charleston that seem to be struggling with all that rent.
Well, and I understand that point too.
Yes, sir.
I heard that just as well, but I'm thinking more in terms of somebody that has a beach house and they don't rent it 6 months or 12-month, long-term lease. It's they either using it or they renting it for a week. That would be the kind of home that I'm talking about. Would it make sense? Because I mean, it's a lot of moving parts. And
yes,
the question really is, I guess, about rate design. Is there a way to start thinking about that?
I mean, you posed something I have not thought about. I'll tell you that in all honesty. And, anything can be looked at, promulgated, and evaluated from that perspective. It'd be interesting to see how you qualify for that and how you guardrail that thing in there that it really is a second home. And as soon as people find out about it, I guarantee you they'll find ways to get out of it. But I think it's something that, we could give consideration to. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I mean, I've heard about people that play games with the property tax thing on the second homes.
Yes, sir.
I don't have an answer. It's just a thought, something to think about.
Yes, sir. We face it at the same time when we talk about extending service because we're required to provide service. We have an obligation to serve, provided it is a permanent residence. And so we have people that manipulate that as well on us by saying, well, I'm living there. Well, it doesn't look like anybody's living there. It looks like it's a hunting cabin or a pawn house to us. But, that's something we have to deal with, and there are people that manipulate it. So it'd have to be something pretty stringent from that perspective.
And let me get back to that $7.5 million bill credit. I believe, if I understand that correctly, that's going to end up just being a 1 month reduction. Is that correct?
That's correct. A one-time bill credit, yes, sir.
Yeah, and that's good. But again, then after that, you've got the rate shock, so to speak, that comes back in. All right, and then changing topics, there was a a comment about the $2 million rate case expenses that carried over from the prior case. And I wasn't 100% sure on the language of the explanation of that. I know it's not in this case, but is that gone forever, permanently, that $2 million?
Yes, sir. That'll be a $2 million write-off that the company takes this year.
All right. So again, switching gears to a different topic, and this relates to the whole company. You've talked a good bit, Mr. Kassam, about Dominion, the parent company, and things that happen in different states and all of that. So, I mean, there's a lot learned from one organization to the other. There's definitely a significant relationship between the companies and how they impact each other. And I had a question that relates to this case and all of those different companies. I'd like to know, operating company by state, what is the current allowed ROE per state, and what is the current authorized equity ratio per state, and when that went into effect. You're pretty smart. You might have that in your head right now.
I ain't that smart, Commissioner, so I don't have that information, but one of our witnesses coming up, Mr. Brandon Phibbs, he would be able to provide you with that information, and I think he's going to follow perhaps me and Mr. Randall after we testify at some later time, and he would be a good person to ask that information to. He'd have it. He's our Chief Financial Officer here in South Carolina.
All right. Well, I appreciate you giving that person, Mr. Phibbs, heads up. And
yes, sir.
Thank you for your answers here. Appreciate it. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas.
If there are more questions, I think we need to take a break. Court reporter may need a break. Are there any more commissioner questions? Hearing none, I guess that's as far as we're going to go today. If this is always the way we try and do it and accommodate people is not start too early, but it always helps if possible if there's no objections, starting maybe 9:30 tomorrow morning, and plan on running a little longer. And I should have put a break in there somewhere, but I kept listening to the answers and then let time pass. So I apologize to anybody that's uncomfortable. We'll adjourn then, and we'll be back at 9:30 in the morning.
Mr. Chairman, just a point of clarity. So I think I heard you say you're done with this panel until 9:30. You're not looking for Mr. Randall and Mr. Kassam at 9:30. You want this panel back at 9:30. Is that correct?
Well, I think we're through with this panel as far as the settlement agreement.
Okay.
And we'll just go to the next panel, and I'll let you meet with the attorney when we stop here and see where we go.
Understood. I just want to make sure we're clear on that. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All have a good evening.